Good morning. This is your daily briefing from the New York Times. Today's headlines for Thursday, August 6, 2026. I'm your host, and we have a packed edition today, from Europe's struggle to control its destiny amid war, fire, and migration, to a sweeping congressional proposal to fuse U.S. and Israeli defense industries, the fallout from a stunning Michigan Senate primary, and a Tibetan activist's final, fiery act that forced the world to look. We'll take you inside a CIA task force targeting Cuba, a near miss over Washington skies, poison trees at Lake Tahoe, a historic FDA approval for an mRNA flu vaccine, a seismic shakeup at the top of Google's AI empire, and much more. Let's begin. First, the top story: Europe is enduring a brutal summer that has laid bare just how much the continent's fate is being shaped by forces far beyond its control. Michael Shear, writing from the Times Washington Bureau, reports that European capitals London, Paris, Madrid, and others are effectively watching from the sidelines as their destiny is dictated by events they cannot direct. The war in Ukraine grinds on. The possibility of a massive new conflict with Iran, driven by President Trump's pressure campaign, threatens to spike oil prices and destabilize energy markets. Record heat is fueling wildfires across southern Europe, from Greece to Spain. And then there is migration. A sudden, unexplained surge of people crossing the Moroccan border into the Spanish exclave of Ceuta has again exposed the fragility of Europe's external borders. As Shear puts it, Europe is being forced to rely less on support from the United States, even as it faces a convergence of crises, geopolitical, climatic, and demographic, that no single European government can manage alone. The question hanging over the continent is whether it can forge a unified response, or whether it will continue to react, crisis by crisis, to events set in motion elsewhere. That brings us to the second top story, a proposal moving through Congress that would fundamentally rewire the U.S.-Israel defense relationship. Robert Jimison reports from the Capitol that for decades, the framework has been straightforward: billions in annual military aid, joint missile defense work, intelligence sharing, and co-development of weapons systems. But with political support for direct military funding to Israel dropping sharply in Washington, Congress is now considering phasing out that financial commitment and replacing it with something far more structural, a legally mandated defense industrial partnership that would integrate the two countries' defense and intelligence apparatuses at the institutional level. The idea is to bind the two nations through co-production, shared supply chains, and joint research and development, making the relationship less about an annual appropriation and more about a permanent, structural interdependence. Supporters argue this would make U.S. support more durable and less vulnerable to political swings. Critics worry it would further entangle the United States in Israel's military decisions, reduce American leverage, and make it harder to condition support on human rights or strategic concerns. The legislation is still being drafted, but the shift in thinking from aid to integration marks a profound evolution in one of the world's closest defense partnerships. And staying with Israel-related politics, the pro-Israel group AIPAC just suffered its biggest primary season defeat, and it may not be done fighting. Jennifer Medina and Theodore Schleifer report that AIPAC's super PAC spent $32 million trying to boost Representative Haley Stevens over Dr. Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan's Democratic Senate primary. El-Sayed, a progressive and a relentless critic of Israel's government, won anyway. Now AIPAC has told allies it is considering a major financial campaign to support the Republican nominee in the general election this fall, a striking move for an organization that has traditionally worked within Democratic primaries to back pro-Israel candidates. The willingness to potentially back a Republican in a Senate race underscores how seriously AIPAC views El-Sayed's rise, and how far it may go to prevent a vocal critic of Israel from reaching the Senate. That Michigan primary, by the way, revealed a coalition that carried El-Sayed to victory. Racial and ethnic splits, and a commanding lead among younger voters, were enough for the progressive doctor to hold off Stevens, a moderate. The Times analysis shows El-Sayed dominated in Dearborn and other Arab American communities, ran strongly in black neighborhoods in Detroit, and crushed Stevens among voters under 40. Stevens carried older, whiter, more suburban voters, but it wasn't enough. The result signals a generational and demographic fault line in Michigan Democrats that will shape the party's future in a critical swing state. Now to the world stage, where three stories demand attention. First, the death of a Tibetan activist that finally forced the world to look. Lobga Rangzan had long been known in exile circles for his fierce commitment to a Tibet free of Chinese control. But no one was prepared for what he did next. He set himself on fire in Manhattan. The self-immolation, a tactic used by Tibetan monks and activists inside Tibet for years, occurred on the streets of New York, bringing a protest method associated with occupied territory to the heart of the global media capital. The act drew immediate worldwide attention to a cause that had struggled to break through. Rangzhen died of his injuries. His final act was a cry of desperation and a calculation that only the most extreme sacrifice could pierce the world's indifference. In Pakistan, a sweeping new crackdown on journalists is underway. Elian Peltier reports from Islamabad that with a protest movement in Pakistan-administered Kashmir challenging the state's authority, the government has imposed severe new restrictions. All journalists working for foreign media outlets must now seek permission to travel outside Pakistan's three major cities: Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi. The rules came after a surge of media coverage of elections in the disputed region, where protesters have clashed with security forces. Rights groups and local journalists say the restrictions will effectively close off one of the last remaining channels for independent reporting from the world's fifth most populous country. The message is clear: the state intends to control the narrative in Kashmir, and it will silence the press to do it. And in a move that signals a sharp escalation in U.S. pressure on Havana, the CIA has secretly established a Cuba task force. Adamantis reports that the task force will allow the agency to rapidly direct more financial, human, and technical resources at the island, with the explicit goal of creating fissures among the Cuban political elite. The creation of the task force adds case officers who recruit and manage spies, intelligence analysts, cyber operators, and officers specializing in covert action. It comes as President Trump demands economic, political, and leadership changes from the Cuban government. The task force represents a return to Cold War-era intensity in U.S. covert operations against Cuba, a significant shift from the engagement-focused approach of recent years. Back in the United States, a startling aviation incident over the Capitol. Kate Kelly reports that Marine One, the helicopter ferrying President Trump, came within less than a mile of an Envoy air passenger jet above Washington on Tuesday. The close call occurred shortly after 2:30 p.m. as Trump was flying to Joint Base Andrews from the White House. Garbled communications with Ronald Reagan National Airport's tower delayed air traffic controllers from clearing nearby air traffic. The helicopter and the regional jet carrying passengers passed within a mile of each other in some of the most congested and tightly controlled airspace in the world. The incident raises fresh concerns about the coordination between military and civilian air traffic control in the D.C. region, where presidential movements, commercial arrivals and departures, and general aviation all compete for limited corridors. No one was hurt, but the margin for error was razor thin. Meanwhile, a mystery is unfolding on the shores of Lake Tahoe. Soumya Karla Mangla reports that someone has been poisoning trees at Burnt Cedar Beach on the Nevada side of the lake. 11 trees were killed over the past several years by a strong-smelling, unidentified substance poured around their bases or placed into holes drilled near their roots. This year alone, another 16 trees have been attacked. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office is investigating. All but one of the trees targeted were Jeffrey pines, a species native to the Sierra Nevada. The substance has a pungent, chemical odor. Who is doing this, and why, remains unknown. But the deliberate, methodical nature of the attacks, drilling holes, applying poison, returning year after year, suggests a vendetta or a deeply disturbed individual targeting a beloved public space. In politics, the saga of the Qatari jet takes a turn. Maggie Haberman and Eric Lipton report that when Qatar donated a Boeing jet for use as a temporary Air Force One, President Trump said the luxury plane would come with him when he left office as a display at his presidential library. Now a White House official says no final decision has been made about which plane will go to the library. That leaves the fate of the Qatari jet unclear. Earlier this week, Eric Trump, who was involved in the library planning, suggested the plane might not go to the library after all. The jet, a 747-8 outfitted with a luxurious interior, has been a source of controversy since Qatar offered it. Critics called it a foreign gift to a sitting president that skirts emoluments concerns. The library itself is still in the planning stages. The plane's ultimate destination, library, government storage, or back to Qatar, remains an open question. Dr. Anthony Fauci is facing a contempt of Congress vote. Jan Hoffman reports that the Senate Homeland Security Committee voted Thursday to hold Fauci in contempt after he declined to answer questions at a hearing last week. Fauci invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, refusing to respond to a single question during the 3-hour session. Republicans, led by Chairman Rand Paul of Kentucky, argue that Fauci is ineligible for Fifth Amendment protection because he accepted a presidential pardon from Joe Biden, a pardon that, in their view, removes the risk of prosecution and thus the basis for the privilege. Legal scholars say the case is unique, hinging on the tension between the Fifth Amendment and the reach of a presidential pardon. If the full Senate upholds the contempt citation, it could refer the matter to the Justice Department for prosecution, though that is unlikely under the current administration. The hearing itself was a spectacle, Republican ideologues boiling over with grievances from 2020 and 2021, Democrats nominally defending science but unsure what that means beyond lip service, and Fauci, a mute embodiment of the scientific establishment, saying nothing at all. In North Carolina, a scandal has left the GOP without a candidate in little time. Eduardo Medina reports from Buncombe and Haywood counties that Representative Chuck Edwards dropped his re-election bid amid sexual harassment charges documented by the House Ethics Committee involving 2 young female aides. On Monday night, the local party chair was told it was still full steam ahead and given campaign signage. By 3:32 a.m. Wednesday, Edwards announced he was dropping out. The timing is disastrous for Republicans. A Democratic farmer named Jamie Yeager was already making inroads in the district, and now the GOP must scramble to find a replacement before the filing deadline. The district, in the Western Mountains, has been reliably Republican, but the combination of an open seat, a credible Democratic challenger, and a scandal-tainted incumbent creates a genuine opening for Democrats in a year when they need every chance they can get. In business, a historic FDA approval. The agency has approved the first mRNA flu vaccine. Christina Jewett reports that the vaccine, called Mflusiva and manufactured by Moderna, marks the first time mRNA technology, proven in the COVID vaccines, has been approved for influenza. The approval follows a dramatic reversal. Initially, the FDA refused to even review Moderna's application. That decision came amid a series of blows to mRNA research directed by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., including the cancellation of 22 projects meant to develop mRNA vaccines through the government's Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. But a public outcry from scientists, public health experts, and patient advocates forced the FDA to reverse course and review the application. The vaccine's advantage: it can be rapidly updated to target a widely prevalent or particularly virulent flu strain, potentially transforming the annual guesswork of flu vaccine production. The approval is a vindication for mRNA technology and a rebuke to the political forces that tried to sideline it. Also in business, a truly bizarre CNN interview. Michael Grinbaum describes it as the cable news equivalent of tweeting through it. Representative Max Miller, an Ohio Republican facing allegations that he emotionally and physically abused his ex-wife and toddler daughter, sat for a 23-minute live interrogation with Jake Tapper. Miller brought a binder. He brought photos. At one point, he held up a stuffed bunny doll, a gift for his daughter, he said, and insisted it proved his love. He denied every allegation. He attacked his ex-wife's credibility. He claimed the bruises on his daughter were from a fall. Tapper pressed him, repeatedly, on the police reports, the medical records, the protection order. Miller stayed calm, almost performative in his composure. The interview was a high-stakes gamble to salvage a flailing re-election campaign amid mounting calls for him to drop out of the Republican primary. Whether it worked or simply deepened the spectacle remains to be seen. And the stock market's record rally has an unexpected driver: the rescue of the yen. Joe Renison reports that the U.S. Treasury's intervention in the Japanese currency last week, officially to prop up a major currency critical to global trade and stabilize the finances of a key ally, had a ripple effect that calmed anxious investors worldwide. The intervention was one of several forces fueling the S&P 500's climb to a fresh record. Analysts say it underscores how tightly connected global market risks have become. Currency stability, bond yields, tech valuations, and AI investment flows all move together. As one strategist put it, it's one part of a big connected picture. The yen's rescue didn't just help Japan, it helped lift the entire risk-on trade, including the AI-driven rally that has powered U.S. equities. In technology, TikTok is laying off 250 employees and shuttering its Nashville office. Emmett Lindner reports that the office, located in the city's Music Row neighborhood, housed members of the app's content moderation team. The company did not give a detailed reason for the layoffs. Workers were notified by email Wednesday morning. Several said they were logged out of their systems immediately. The office will close on October 5. The employees are not unionized. The move comes as TikTok's U.S. joint venture navigates continued regulatory uncertainty and cost pressures. At the same time, Google is shaking up its AI leadership in dramatic fashion. Kate Conger and Cade Metz report that minutes after 4 top researchers announced they were leaving, Google said Demis Hassabis, the Nobel-winning scientist who led Google DeepMind, would step into a new role, chair of the lab and chief scientist of Alphabet. The departures and the promotion were announced almost simultaneously. Jeff Dean, Google's chief scientist and 30th employee, is leaving to co-found a new AI startup with 3 other senior researchers. Dr. Hassabis's new job removes him from day-to-day operations of DeepMind, the crown jewel of Google's AI empire, and elevates him to a strategic role across Alphabet. The changes represent a dramatic restructuring at the very top of one of the world's most important AI organizations and signal a shifting power structure inside Google. That startup, by the way, is being led by Jeff Dean himself. Cade Metz reports from Palo Alto that Dean, widely regarded as one of the most important figures in Google's history, he built the global computer network powering search and was an early leader in AI research, is forming a new artificial intelligence company with the backing of Google. 3 other senior researchers are joining him. The move exposes the changing dynamics inside Google. Even its most legendary engineers are spinning out, backed by the very company they helped build, to pursue new ideas with venture capital's blessing. It's a testament to the frothy, competitive state of the AI landscape and to Google's determination to keep its talent close, even when they leave. In New York, the death of a Salvadoran immigrant at the Federal Detention Center in Newark has renewed scrutiny of conditions there. Ana Ley reports that Edwin Lopez Cornejo, 41, was taken from Delaney Hall to University Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on Saturday. Government officials have not said how he died. His family has demanded answers. On Wednesday, the Department of Homeland Security said New Jersey hospital officials and the state medical examiner would provide more information. Delaney Hall, operated by a private contractor under ICE oversight, has long been criticized by advocates for poor medical care, overcrowding, and lack of transparency. Lopez Cornejo's death is the latest in a string of fatalities that have drawn congressional and legal attention to the immigrant detention system. On a brighter note, Mayor Zoran Mamdani's plan to expand free childcare to 2-year-olds launched this week in 4 communities, and the first 2,000 families to get a seat are thrilled. Emma Fitzsimmons reports that Christine Liverpool, a New York City bus driver, had considered sending her daughter Cadence to a private day care center in Queens at $1,500 a month, too expensive. She planned to keep Cadence with relatives. Then she got the call, a seat in the new program. When they told me I got accepted, I kind of wanted to cry, she said. That was a burden lifted off of me. The program, known as 3K for 2-year-olds, aims to eventually serve tens of thousands of families. For the first 2,000, it's already life-changing, saving families an estimated $26,000 a year. And at the new school, a tenured professor and longtime critic of the university was among 19 educators laid off as the institution navigates financial woes. The professor, who had tenure, was let go anyway, a rare move that has alarmed faculty and raised questions about academic freedom and the pressures facing higher education. The new school, a progressive university in Greenwich Village, has faced budget deficits exacerbated by enrollment declines and rising costs. The layoffs, which included tenured and tenure-track faculty, have sparked protests and a vote of no confidence in the administration. For a school that prides itself on intellectual dissent, the dismissal of a prominent critical voice has struck a nerve. In arts, a provocative new film, One Night Only, reviewed by Natalia Winkleman. This dystopian rom-com follows Allie, played by Monica Barbaro, and Owen, played by Callum Turner, on their parallel hunts for passion in a puritanical society where premarital sex is a criminal offense except for an annual 12-hour reprieve. The government enforces the ban with neurochemical sensors implanted in every citizen. If an unmarried person experiences arousal spikes near someone else, police are alerted. The film imagines a world where desire is policed, and one night a year, the dam breaks. Winkleman writes that it's as if born of a conversation between libidinous boys in the back row of a school bus, taking the premise of The Purge and making it about sex. It's satirical, weird, and oddly tender. On Netflix this August, 2 standout titles: the second season of 100 Years of Solitude, Netflix's ambitious adaptation of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's magical realist masterpiece, concludes the story of the Buendia family with 8 episodes wrapping up the rise and fall of Macondo. And the documentary A Child of My Own, a deeply personal film about parenthood, identity, and the choices that define a life. Both start streaming this month. And Ted Lasso is back for an unexpected season 4. Christopher Orr recaps the premiere, Begin Again. The show was loudly, publicly intended to end after 3 seasons. Ted, the American college football coach who went to England to fix a soccer team and himself, seemed to have completed his arc. But here we are. The premiere opens on a dark screen, a rhythmic beeping, a heart monitor, and Ted in Kansas City. But how long will he stay there? The new season appears to be grappling with what happens after the happy ending, when the coach who fixed everyone else has to figure out how to fix himself again. In books, A Star Scholar's Stunning Fall. Neil Vigdor and Jennifer Schuessler report that Jason Arty, hired by the University of Cambridge in 2023 as the youngest black professor in its history, has resigned amid a deepening controversy over his academic qualifications and claims about his life. Doubts have been raised about his published work, his educational background, and his personal narrative. Cambridge announced an investigation 6 days before his scheduled resignation. Arty wrote in a statement, "I no longer wish to feel as though I am living under a constant spotlight, where every aspect of my life is subject to public examination and judgment." The case has ignited debates about diversity hiring, academic verification, and the pressures on trailblazing scholars. Also in books, A.O. Scott makes the case that Gone Girl is the best thriller of the 21st century. He dissects the first page of Gillian Flynn's novel, the famous opening with Nick Dunn describing his wife's head, the shape of it, the contents of her brain, and shows how Flynn gets inside the reader's head from the very first sentence. It's a masterclass in unreliable narration, marital dysfunction as psychological horror, and the way a thriller can dissect a culture. And readers can play the Times game to rank their top thrillers and see how their tastes compare. In food, California cuisine is having a moment, freer, more curated, deeply global. For salads capture the essence, pluets topped with pistachio suya, a West African spice blend, heirloom tomatoes dressed with fish sauce vinaigrette, grilled peaches with fermented chili oil and herbs, and a watermelon radish salad with toasted sesame and lime. The state's chefs are drawing on diaspora flavors, Mexican, Korean, Nigerian, Japanese, with a confidence that feels less like fusion and more like a new pantry. It's California on a plate, abundant, inventive, unapologetically hybrid. And grocery prices are still high. 2 years ago, the Times collected receipts from shoppers across the U.S. Now they've checked back in with 5 of them. The adjustments are revealing more store brands, less meat, strategic bulk buying, cutting snacks, growing herbs on windowsills. One shopper in Ohio said she now plans meals around what's on sale, not what she wants to cook. Another in Arizona drives to 3 stores to get the best prices on produce, dairy, and pantry staples. The inflation peak has passed, but the habits it forged and the prices that remain elevated have permanently changed how Americans shop. In science, New Zealand is racing to vaccinate its endangered birds against avian flu. Laura Chung reports from Sydney that conservation experts are trying to slow the march of H5N1 bird flu in a country home to rare, endemic species found nowhere else, kakapo, takahea kiwi. Vaccinating them is brutally hard. It can involve journeys to remote, windswept islands or deep forests, locating camouflaged birds, capturing them, administering the vaccine, and returning months later for boosters. But for the Department of Conservation, it's existential. New Zealand officials knew the virus would arrive. They're trying to buy time for species that have no natural immunity. The U.S. has cut ties with an organ donor group after reports of abuses. Brian Rosenthal reports that the federal government is ending its contract with Network for Hope, the nonprofit that coordinates organ donations in Kentucky, after finding it pressured medical workers to pursue organs from critically ill patients who were recovering. The decision, announced Wednesday, will effectively shut down the organization. It's part of a months-long effort to address unsafe practices in the U.S. organ transplant system. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s department cut ties with a similar nonprofit in South Florida last year. The Kentucky case involved allegations that the organization pushed hospitals to declare patients dead prematurely, or to withdraw life support against medical judgment, to secure organs. The transplant system relies on trust. These abuses strike at its foundation. And a 4-ton SpaceX rocket stage hit the moon, and almost no one saw it. Kenneth Chang reports that a discarded upper stage of a Falcon 9 rocket slammed into the lunar surface on March 4, 2025, but the impact occurred on the far side, out of view. Amateur and professional astronomers pointed telescopes at the predicted site. Most detected nothing. But definitive evidence emerged later. The Very Large Telescope in Chile observed sodium and lithium in a plume at the predicted time and place. The Lowell Discovery Telescope in Arizona confirmed the sodium. A South Korean spacecraft, Dan Yuri, photographed the newly formed crater. So yes, it crashed. We just had to wait for the dust to settle, literally. In wellness, the Senate confirmed Dr. Erica Schwartz as CDC director on a 51-44 vote, mostly along party lines. Apoorva Mandavili reports that Schwartz, a deputy surgeon general in the first Trump administration, has publicly supported childhood vaccines, a crucial stance after the controversies of recent years. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia was the lone Democrat to vote for her. The confirmation ends nearly a year without a full-time CDC leader. Schwartz's priority, she has said, is restoring trust in the agency and focusing on chronic disease prevention alongside infectious disease readiness. And in Tiny Love Stories, a reader named Kathleen Perkle shares a story of her mother, Joan, visiting her dying best friend Jean in the hospital. Jean was embarrassed because she could no longer wear her dentures. Joan showed up anyway, removed her own dentures before entering the room, and gave Jean the biggest gummy smile she could muster. They laughed, reminisced about college, and spent the afternoon together. 60 years of friendship, honored in a single, toothless grin. In travel, Celine Yujinsu, a travel reporter used to chronicling other people's vacation disasters, lived her own nightmare this summer. On the first day of her family's long-awaited trip, she stepped out of their Chicago hotel into a thick, orange-tinted haze, wildfire smoke from Canada. Her throat burned instantly. They had fled Geneva, where heat waves hit 104 degrees, only to land in a city choking on smoke. Flights were delayed, cancelled, rebooked. The rental car broke down. The kids got sick. The new normal of climate-disrupted travel, heat, fire, airport chaos, came for the chronicler herself. It's a dispatch from the front lines of a world where vacation planning now requires contingency plans for planetary systems. Meanwhile, in St. Ives, the Cornish beach town, a family vacation unfolds in a different register: surf sessions, lunches by the sand, a landscape that still inspires painters. The mythical Cornish lake, the clarity, the color, the way it falls on the water, is real. The town, once a fishing port, now draws artists, surfers, and families seeking something slower. The piece is a reminder that even in a summer of extremes, there are places where the rhythm holds. In real estate, 3 homes for $845,000, a furnished cottage in Lake Arrowhead, California, with lake views and walking distance to a coffee shop and a classic hamburger stand, a colonial revival in Stonington, Connecticut, with saltwater frontage and a deepwater dock, and a 2-story house in New Orleans, in the Bywater, with a roof deck and a courtyard. 3 very different lives for the same price. And a design question: which wood goes best with your hardwood floors? Talia Maiden, the Times design obsessive, says mixing wood tones is not only fine, it's desirable. The key is contrast with intention: pair warm with cool, light with dark, or match undertones. Don't try to match exactly, it rarely works. Instead, create a dialogue between the woods. Your built-ins can be walnut while your floors are white oak if the undertones speak the same language. And in Wellington, Florida, a town of 9,000 horses and the humans who follow them, development is coming for the equestrian elite. From December to March, 25,000 people migrate here for competitions. Olympic gold medalist Christian Kukuk lives 50-50 between Germany and Wellington, bringing an entourage of 10 horses, grooms, and trainers. New luxury developments, estates with private arenas, climate-controlled barns, helipads, are rising on former farmland. The town is leaning in, hard, on its identity as the global capital of winter equestrian sport. The horses, and the money that follows them, are reshaping the landscape. In fashion, Abdul El Sayed's campaign uniform, black V-neck t-shirt, jeans, has become a signature. Vanessa Friedman asks, could this be the next big thing in Washington? On primary night, El Sayed wore a suit for his victory speech, a notable departure. The t-shirt and jeans look was a dressed-down rejection of the establishment, a visual contrast with his suited opponent Haley Stevens, and an unmistakable signal of authenticity to younger voters. Whether it translates to the Senate or inspires a wave of black-teed staffers on the Hill remains to be seen. At Tuskegee University, a historically black university in Alabama, a new dress code has banned bonnets and do-rags in class and the cafeteria. Sandra Garcia reports that students objected, saying the policy was unnecessary and misunderstood campus culture. The president's letter also prohibited revealing clothing and bedroom shoes. Students argued that bonnets and do-rags are protective hair care, not sleepwear, part of a culture of black hair maintenance that the administration failed to grasp. The backlash was swift: petitions, social media campaigns, meetings with administrators. The university says it's reviewing the policy. The clash reveals a generational and cultural disconnect at an institution founded to serve black students. And in social cues, a reader asks if she can ask her boyfriend to straighten and whiten his teeth. He's wonderful, funny, smart, hardworking, a future she can imagine. But his teeth are crooked and discolored, and it affects her attraction. Her mother has made comments. Philip Ghislaine says, attraction matters, but so does tact. Dental work is expensive and personal. If you say something, frame it as care, not criticism. I want you to feel confident in your smile lands differently than your teeth bother me. And be prepared for the answer, he may not want to change. That's his right. Love the person, not the potential veneer. In obituaries, two literary and musical giants. Ursula Hegge, who wrote searing novels about Nazi-era Germany, died at 80. Her best-known work, Stones from the River and early Oprah's book club selection, was set in a fictional German town in the early 20th century, exploring silence, community, and historical memory. Born in occupied Germany just after the war, she immigrated to the US but kept Germany as her imaginative wellspring. Her work asked what ordinary people do when the world goes mad. And Lou Kohler, frontman of Sick of It All, ambassador of New York hardcore, died at 61. He screamed as much as sang. The band emerged from an insular, sometimes violent subculture to do the least punk thing imaginable, promote friendship and togetherness. To the initiated, they were the titans of the scene, the closest hardcore had to a household name. Kohler's voice, his presence, his relentless touring, spread the sound of the New York underground to the world. He died of esophageal cancer. In the magazine, a stunning piece on the millions of children who serve as family caregivers in the U.S. The modern healthcare system requires the work of caregiving to fall to whoever else lives in the household, even if they're kids. These children administer medication, navigate insurance, translate for parents, bathe siblings, manage emergencies. They miss school, lose sleep, carry burdens invisible to policy. The piece asks, what does it say about a country that relies on children to hold its healthcare system together? Finally, opinion. Emily Key-Jin argues that 25 artifacts explain America. Look at our stuff to understand the country. The Opinions podcast asks, have we turned personality into diagnosis? Influencers push self-diagnosis of ADHD, autism, and more, but what happens when large populations believe they have conditions the data doesn't back? Michelle Goldberg writes that Abdul El-Sayed is quick, magnetic, overflowing with infectious confidence, but has a blind spot endemic to his movement. David Wallace Wells says Fauci has a lot to answer for, but we're asking the wrong questions. We can't learn from the pandemic if we're obsessed with blame. And Jessica Grows dissects the tradwife illusion meeting anti-Trump reality, Nara Smith's domestic perfection on TikTok, her disavowal of the label, and the attention economy that fuels it all. That's your briefing for August 6, 2026. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the stories that matter. Have a good day.